Most people who end up on lists like this one share a few things in common. They were feared, they were calculated, and they operated for years before anyone could stop them. Some were professional hitmen working inside America's most powerful crime organizations. Others built their own empires through sheer brutality. A few managed to stay completely invisible while the bodies kept piling up. This countdown covers 7 individuals whose confirmed and suspected kill counts place them among the most violent figures in United States gang history. Harry Pittsburgh Phil Strauss. When it came to mafia hitmen, Harry Strauss was right at the top. Working alongside Abe Relis, he became one of the most feared killers in Murder Inc., a man the mob could send almost anywhere to make someone disappear. Born in Brooklyn on July 28, 1909, Strauss was already deep in the criminal world by his mid-20s. He had been arrested 17 times, and yet somehow he kept slipping through the cracks. He would never even make it to 32. Known by the nickname Pittsburgh Phil, Strauss developed a reputation so terrifying that some mob historians believe he may have killed as many as 500 people. He was one of the underworld's most trusted hitmen, and his services were in constant demand. When someone needed to disappear, Strauss was the kind of man the mob called. His favorite weapon was an ice pick, but that was hardly the limit of his brutality. On one occasion, he reportedly used an axe to hack a man to death inside a movie theater. There was no hesitation, no second thoughts. For Strauss, killing was simply part of the job. And what made him even darker was the pride he seemed to take in it. Strauss dressed sharply, traveled comfortably, and sometimes treated a murder like a business trip. After carrying out a hit, he would occasionally stay in town another day just to read the newspaper and see how the killing was being reported. While everyone else was trying to figure out who had done it, Strauss was sitting somewhere nearby, calmly reading about his own handiwork. That confidence came from one major advantage. Local police usually had no idea who he was. Strauss would arrive from another state, find his target, carry out the hit, and disappear before investigators could even understand what had happened. To police departments unfamiliar with him, he was practically a ghost. That reputation followed him into Detroit in 1937 when he was sent after Harry Millman, a mobster connected to the notorious Purple Gang. Strauss walked into a local diner and opened fire, killing Millman while 5 innocent bystanders were also wounded in the chaos. Then, just like that, Strauss vanished. His ability to stay one step ahead of the law became so frustrating that New York Assistant District Attorney Burton Turkus reportedly pointed out that Strauss had managed to avoid a conviction for even the smallest offense. But Strauss eventually made one mistake he could not escape. In 1940, his former murder incumbent partner, Abe Relis, turned informant and began telling authorities everything he knew. And when Relis started talking, Strauss's name came up. Suddenly, the ghost had a face. Strauss was put on trial, and with the evidence piling up, he knew exactly what was waiting for him. Desperate to escape the death penalty, he tried to convince the court that he was insane. He played the part so aggressively that it became almost impossible to tell where the act ended and reality began. But the evidence was too strong, especially in the murder of Irving Feinstein, a killing Strauss had carried out alongside Relis. The verdict was death. Strauss was sentenced to the electric chair and sent to Sing Sing prison, where he spent his final months behind bars. And even with his life hanging in the balance, he refused to drop the act. He continued pretending to be mentally ill right up until the very end. On June 12, 1941, Harry Strauss was strapped into the electric chair and executed. Roy DeMeo. Roy DeMeo was born into a working-class Italian immigrant family in Brooklyn, but crime found him early. By the time he finished high school in 1959, he was already running a small loan sharking operation while working as a butcher. That background would later prove strangely useful. DeMeo eventually caught the attention of Anthony Gaggi, a Gambino-connected mobster who saw potential in him. DeMeo joined the organization and slowly built his own crew. What started with car theft and loan sharking eventually turned into something much darker. By the 1970s, the DeMeo crew had become one of Brooklyn's most feared criminal outfits. Their first known murder came in 1975 when a former associate named Andre Katz decided to cooperate with authorities. Katz disappeared and the message was clear: betrayal came with a price. Then DeMeo developed his infamous killing system, later known as the Gemini method. Targets were brought through a side entrance of the Gemini Lounge, where they were quickly shot, stabbed, drained of blood, dismembered, and packed away. The remains were dumped at Fountain Avenue, making the victims incredibly difficult to find. It was cold, organized, and brutally efficient. DeMeo's crew eventually worked with the Westies, a violent Irish-American gang, creating a partnership that brought serious money and influence. The deal impressed Gambino boss Paul Castellano enough to make DeMeo an officially inducted member. But there was a problem. Castellano ordered him to stop dealing drugs and get permission before carrying out killings. DeMeo ignored both rules. His crew continued moving narcotics while DeMeo kept making people disappear. Then his paranoia pushed him over the edge. In 1976, DeMeo became convinced that a young salesman named Dominic Ragucci was a Cuban hitman sent to kill him. Ragucci was completely innocent. DeMeo chased him through Long Island and eventually shot him dead. When DeMeo discovered his mistake, he reportedly broke down. By the early 1980s, the FBI was closing in. Informants were talking, investigators were watching the Gemini Lounge, and missing person cases were piling up. According to accounts of the time, Castellano eventually decided DeMeo had become too dangerous to keep alive. Several mobsters were considered for the job, but even they hesitated. On January 10, 1983, DeMeo disappeared after attending a meeting. 10 days later, police found his body inside the trunk of his Cadillac, riddled with bullets. DeMeo's death removed one of the biggest threats inside the Gambino family. And ironically, the man who benefited most was John Gotti. With DeMeo gone, the balance of power in New York's underworld was about to change forever. Thomas "Tommy Pitt" Patera. Thomas Patera was born in Brooklyn in 1954, and growing up, he was quiet, skinny, and easy for bullies to pick on. His high-pitched voice made him an even bigger target. But instead of staying weak, Patera became obsessed with martial arts after watching shows like The Green Hornet. As a teenager, he took that obsession all the way to Japan, where he spent 2 years training in Togakure Ryu, an ancient form of ninjutsu. When he returned to Brooklyn, the bully kid was gone. He had transformed himself into someone people thought twice about crossing. But the streets quickly learned that Patera wasn't just dangerous because he could fight. He was cold. Somehow, Patera found his way into the Bonanno crime family and quickly built a reputation as one of its most feared killers. By the 1980s, he had become a made man, working under Anthony Sparrow and taking on increasingly serious jobs. His reputation exploded in 1988 when he allegedly killed Willie Boy Johnson, a longtime driver for Gambino boss John Gotti, who had secretly been cooperating with the government. The hit reportedly earned Patera Gotti's respect and opened the door to more work. But Patera's violence eventually crossed even mafia boundaries. In 1987, he killed Phyllis Birdie after believing she had supplied his wife with drugs that contributed to her fatal overdose. Killing women was a line most mobsters avoided, but Patera didn't seem to care. What truly separated him from other killers was the way he handled bodies. He became known for carefully dismembering victims, cleaning crime scenes, and making people disappear so thoroughly that investigators struggled to find evidence. And while all of this was happening, Patera was still running drugs, extortion, loan sharking, and robberies. By the 1990s, DEA agents had been quietly building a case against him through surveillance, wiretaps, and informants. Then investigators raided his home and found something disturbing. Books and material focused heavily on murder, warfare, and dismemberment. Even worse, authorities eventually discovered 6 bodies buried in a hidden Staten Island graveyard. One of Patera's associates eventually cracked and began cooperating with investigators, giving prosecutors the opening they needed. In 1992, Patera went to trial facing multiple murder charges and the possibility of the federal death penalty. The jury ultimately convicted him of 6 murders, but spared his life. Instead of death row, Patera received life in prison. The man once feared on Brooklyn streets has remained behind bars ever since. Richard the Iceman Kuklinski. Richard Kuklinski was born in Jersey City in 1935, and from the beginning, home was anything but safe. His father was a violent alcoholic, while his mother was harsh and abusive. The beatings were so severe that Kuklinski's older brother reportedly died from one, though the family covered it up as an accident. Kuklinski grew up surrounded by fear, and eventually he started giving that same fear back to the world. As a teenager, he tortured animals, dropped out of school, and at just 14, killed a neighborhood bully. Standing nearly 6'5" and weighing close to 300 pounds, he eventually became a terrifying presence on the streets. By the 1950s, Kuklinski had crossed paths with the mafia. He became associated with Roy DeMeo after surviving a brutal beating over a debt without showing fear. DeMeo was impressed, and Kuklinski soon became useful to the crew, handling robberies, illegal pornography, collections, and beatings. But Kuklinski was already killing outside the mob. Around 1954, he began traveling between New Jersey and Manhattan, killing people for money, revenge, or sometimes no clear reason at all. He used guns, knives, poison, explosives, and his bare hands. His unpredictability made him difficult to connect to the growing number of murders. Eventually, organized crime began using him as a professional hitman. His reputation became so dark that fellow criminals started viewing him as something close to the devil. He claimed to follow only 2 rules. Women and children were off limits. Almost everyone else was fair game. His favorite method involved cyanide hidden inside a nasal spray bottle, but his most infamous trick involved freezing bodies and dumping them much later. That delayed the estimated time of death and earned him the nickname the Iceman. The strangest part was the life he built at home. Kuklinski married Barbara Pedrici in 1961 and raised 3 children in a comfortable New Jersey suburb. They went to private schools, took vacations, attended church, and lived what looked like a normal family life. Barbara knew he could be brutally abusive, but she had no idea she was married to a suspected serial killer. For roughly 25 years, Kuklinski kept those 2 worlds completely separate. Then, in the 1980s, he became more ambitious and started building his own criminal operation. That decision finally exposed him. An undercover ATF investigation recorded him agreeing to carry out a murder for money. In 1986, police surrounded his car while he and Barbara were heading to breakfast. Kuklinski was arrested and eventually convicted of multiple murders, receiving consecutive life sentences. Behind bars, he continued telling investigators and filmmakers about his crimes, claiming responsibility for even more killings. Some claims remain disputed, but investigators believed his true victim count could have been far higher. After 25 years in prison, Kuklinski's health collapsed. He died in a hospital on March 5, 2006, leaving behind one of the darkest criminal legacies in American history. Timothy Joseph McGee. Timothy McGee never looked like the typical member of a Sureño gang. He was Caucasian with Scottish and Mexican roots, yet he became a fully patched member of Tunaville 13, a mostly Chicano gang based around Atwater Village in Los Angeles. At first, Tunaville was a small neighborhood crew. They were nowhere near the size or fame of gangs like MS-13 or 18th Street. But McGee was about to change that. His criminal career was already moving fast. At 18, he went to prison for assaulting a police officer. After serving time, he kept violating parole and returning to prison. By 26, he had already spent roughly a quarter of his life behind bars, and investigators believed he was doing far worse whenever he was free. Police linked McGee to several murders, including the killing of rival gang member Ryan Martin, who was shot more than 25 times. He was also connected to the 1999 murder of Dwayne Dupree, a bodyguard for rapper Corrupt, outside a Los Angeles recording studio. By 2000, McGee had risen to the top of Tunaville 13, but he wasn't content defending his neighborhood. He took his crew into rival territory, looking for people to kill. One of the most disturbing cases involved 16-year-old Ryan Gonzalez. Gonzalez belonged to a rival gang, but McGee reportedly had no personal reason to target him. Their only connection was a shared nickname. That was enough. Then came even more random violence. McGee allegedly killed 17-year-old Marty Gregory Roybal while the teenager sat near the Los Angeles River drawing. He then killed David Lamont Martin, a homeless man who witnessed the shooting. What made the scene even darker was McGee's apparent lack of emotion afterward. He simply wanted to go get something to eat. Under McGee, Tunaville became almost military-like. Members trained together, practiced shooting, and used radios and lookouts to protect their territory. The violence eventually became so aggressive that McGee organized an ambush against 2 LAPD officers. Both officers survived. Then McGee disappeared. A massive manhunt followed. The U.S. Marshals placed him on their most wanted list, while national television turned him into the monster of Atwater Village. Finally, in February 2003, authorities caught him in Bullhead City, Arizona. McGee was convicted of 3 murders and linked to several more. In 2009, a judge sentenced him to death, describing his behavior as if he were hunting human beings for sport. Today, McGee remains on California's death row at San Quentin, and even behind bars, violence has continued to follow him, with prison attacks and riots adding to a record already stained by the deaths of at least a dozen people. Jose Manuel Martinez. Jose Manuel Martinez was born in Fresno, California in 1962, but his childhood was split between 2 worlds. He spent part of his early years in Mexico before returning to California, where he saw migrant workers grinding through long days just to survive. At home, though, there was another influence. His stepfather was a major heroin dealer who was sent to prison in 1977. Then, in 1978, everything changed. Martinez's older sister was raped and murdered, and the 16-year-old responded with a level of violence that would define the rest of his life. He hunted down 3 men he believed were responsible, killed them, and buried their bodies together. 2 years later, Martinez carried out his first paid killing. On October 21st, 1980, 18-year-old Martinez followed 23-year-old David Bedolla as he left home for work. As Bedolla drove toward the grape fields, Martinez pulled out a .22 caliber pistol and opened fire. Several bullets smashed through the windshield before two struck Bedolla in the head. His car crashed into a vineyard and he died instantly. That was the beginning of Martinez's career as a professional killer. Over the next 3 decades, he operated almost like a ghost. He became known as El Mano Negra, or the Black Hand, a nickname that reportedly came from the gunpowder stains left on his hand after years of target practice. Martinez claimed he eventually carried out more than 30 murders across the United States. Investigators initially had little reason to connect him to them. His criminal record mostly involved drugs, human trafficking, and probation violations, allowing him to stay beneath the radar. But in 2013, Border Patrol finally arrested him in Arizona over a murder warrant from Alabama. During questioning, Martinez began confessing to killings investigators had struggled to solve for years. He provided victim details, ammunition information, maps, and crime scene descriptions that made detectives believe he was telling the truth. His method was cold and calculated. He would watch a target for days, sometimes a week, study their routine, and usually bring a bodyguard. Clients provided the weapons, so the same gun was never used twice. Yet, Martinez refused to give investigators everything. He protected the identities of his partners and employers and stayed vague about his alleged connections to the Sinaloa cartel. Eventually, the justice system caught up with him from multiple directions. He received 50 years in Alabama, then 10 consecutive life sentences in California. Florida prosecutors later pursued him for a double murder, but a jury chose life in prison instead of death. Today, Martinez remains behind bars, his name permanently tied to decades of contract killings, revenge, and a trail of cold cases that followed him across America. Nate Boone Craft. Nate Boone grew up on Detroit's east side, surrounded by the kind of poverty that teaches a kid early that life does not play fair. His parents worked constantly just to survive, while his father was often away serving in the military. Boone watched his family struggle, and somewhere along the way, he decided being broke was a trap he would never accept. He started hustling young, doing small jobs like other kids. But then he noticed something. Street dealers were walking around with more cash than anyone working a regular job. Boone paid attention, and before long, he was already running errands for a local dealer named Charlie. By 9, he was in the drug game. By 10, he had committed his first murder. That was the moment the line disappeared. Boone became known as Muscle. If somebody owed money or stepped out of line, he was the one sent to handle it. When Charlie later refused to pay him and continued disrespecting him, Boone gave him a warning. Charlie ignored it. Boone killed him. From there, violence became part of his identity. Years of bullying had already hardened Boone, and the streets only pushed him further. He became feared across Detroit, eventually earning names like the Grim Reaper and the Iceman because of how cold he appeared when dealing with his enemies. Even prison and juvenile facilities could not contain him. After a robbery ended with Boone shooting a security guard, he was sent through youth homes, detention centers, and foster care. He continued attacking people inside. By 16, he was essentially homeless, sleeping wherever he could. Then, Boone found his place in Detroit's underworld. He eventually connected with the Best Friends, a crew that became one of the city's most feared criminal organizations, and Boone later worked closely with Maserati Rick, but betrayal inside the crew triggered a chain of killings that would eventually tear everything apart. When Boone's own brother Andre was murdered. The conflict became personal. Boone secretly began cooperating with federal investigators while pretending to remain loyal to the crew. Then, his own people turned on him. During a planned hit, Boone was ambushed and shot multiple times. Somehow, he survived. After that, he helped federal authorities dismantle the organization, admitting involvement in roughly 30 murders in exchange for immunity and witness protection. Yet, despite all the bloodshed, one death stayed with him: an innocent cab driver killed in the crossfire during the attack that nearly took Boone's life.